The clock on the microwave blinked 2 a.m. The kitchen was silent, save for the faint, steady hum of the laptop fan. Mark stared at the screen, the blue light washing over a stack of overdue notices that had been sitting on the table for 3 days. He clicked the banking app. The numbers blinked back. $42. He refreshed the page, hoping for a discrepancy, but the total remained unchanged. He closed the tab and leaned back, his chair creaking against the linoleum. He worked 60 hours a week. Every shift was a grind, every week a blur of exhaustion. Yet the math did not add up. The bills were stacking higher than his paychecks could reach. He looked at his hands, calloused and tired, then back at the empty screen. This was not a lack of effort. He was working himself into the ground for a deficit. The realization hit him with the weight of cold iron. He could not keep running in place and expect to reach the finish line. He reached for a notebook, his fingers gripping the pen. Something had to change, and it had to start with the truth of his own failure. Mark opened the notebook to a blank page. He dated the top corner and drew a single line down the center. For the next 30 days, he vowed to record every cent that left his possession. The first entry was simple, a $5 coffee from the morning commute. By the end of the first week, the page was cluttered with similar marks. He tallied the numbers and stared at the result. The forgotten streaming services, the small daily snacks, the convenience of takeout on his way home from late shifts. It was a steady, silent leak. He sat for an hour, recalculating the totals, watching how the small, invisible costs cannibalized his paycheck before the rent was even due. He saw the pattern clearly now. It was not just the low income. It was the lack of awareness. Every purchase he had made out of habit or fatigue was a brick removed from his own foundation. The realization left him cold. He had been working 60 hours a week, only to hand the fruits of his labor away in increments of $5 and $10. The paper in front of him was proof of his own complicity in his struggle. The list on the notebook grew longer, but Mark did not look away. He saw the subscriptions he had not used in months, the digital services that pulled funds automatically every 30 days. He opened his laptop again, navigated to the settings, and clicked cancel on every single one. The confirmation screens flashed by, each one a small victory against the tide. He moved to the kitchen. The next morning, he skipped the coffee shop. He took a travel mug from the cupboard, filled it with home-brewed coffee, and packed a simple lunch into a plastic container. The routine felt foreign, even awkward, as he stood in his kitchen preparing for the day instead of rushing out the door. He felt the pull of the old habit, the desire for the convenience of a quick stop, but he forced himself to walk out the door with his own bag in hand. He stopped the automated payments that were draining his account. He deleted the saved credit card information from his browsers, removing the ease of impulse buying. By the end of the week, the bank balance did not drop as sharply as it usually did. The relentless, automated bleeding of his funds had finally stopped. He sat at the table and looked at his account. The number was still low, but for the first time, it was entirely within his control. Mark turned his attention to the largest anchors dragging him down, his vehicle and his rent. He looked at the monthly car payment, an amount that consumed nearly a third of his income. He listed the car for sale, met with a buyer, and watched the vehicle drive away for the final time. With the cash in hand, he purchased a reliable used sedan, paying the difference and eliminating the monthly debt cycle entirely. Next, he looked at his apartment. The space was large, but the cost per square foot was devouring his progress. He spent 3 days packing boxes, moving his belongings into a smaller, studio-style apartment across town. The process was grueling. He hauled heavy crates downstairs and into a rented van, feeling the physical exhaustion of the transition. When he sat in the center of his new, smaller floor space, he felt the absence of the previous financial burden. He opened a new banking interface, created a dedicated account labeled Emergency, and deposited the first windfall from his lower rent and eliminated car payment. He watched the digital balance climb for the first time. Every dollar he saved from his previous life was now locked away in this new vault, serving as a buffer against the world. The emergency fund account sat on his screen like a dormant beast. Each month, the balance ticked upward by small, calculated increments. Mark lived with a newfound, rigid discipline. He bypassed the vending machines at work, ignored the seasonal sales flyers in his mailbox, and kept his thermostat low to save on utilities. The air in his studio apartment felt thin, quiet, and deliberate. He tracked every cent with a ledger, ensuring the buffer remained untouched. He knew the money was not for comfort. It was a wall he was building against the unknown. He walked past stores without looking in. His focus narrowed to the numbers on his phone. The silence of the apartment at night was no longer a wait, but a test. He waited for the car to break down, for the medical bill to arrive, or for the house systems to fail. He kept his bank app open while he worked, watching the total, counting the days he could survive if his income stopped tomorrow. He was living in a state of prepared stillness, his hands steady, his eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for the inevitable moment when his resolve would be forced to meet the reality of a crisis. The sound started as a sharp, rhythmic hiss from the corner of the living room. Mark looked up from his book just as a plume of white steam erupted, curling toward the ceiling. He stood, walked to the radiator, and felt the wet heat against his palm. The valve had failed. A month ago, this would have been a catastrophe. He would have stared at the wall, thinking of credit card limits and interest rates. Instead, he pulled out his phone. He dialed a repair service, listened to the quote, and confirmed the appointment for the following morning. He returned to his desk and opened his banking app. The balance in the emergency fund was sufficient. He moved the cursor to the transfer button, tapped the screen, and cleared the total cost of the parts and labor. He did not reach for a credit card. He did not call anyone to borrow money. He simply closed the app, walked to the kitchen, and grabbed a towel to mop the water from the floor. The anxiety that usually tightened his chest remained absent. He looked at the leaking pipe, then at his phone, and finally understood that the wall he had built was holding. With the immediate crisis resolved, Mark turned his attention to the long game. He set up an automatic transfer of $50 every month into a low-cost index fund. The first month passed, then the second, then the sixth. The balance on his screen seemed locked in place, barely inching forward. It felt like watching paint dry. He opened his phone to check his accounts, and the screen flashed with images from his peers. A new luxury watch on a wrist, a weekend trip to a coastal resort, expensive dinners documented in high resolution. The noise was constant, a digital stream of consumption that made his own $50 contribution feel microscopic and foolish. He felt the urge to pause the transfer, to buy something that would provide an immediate, visible reward. He stared at the buy button on a retail app, his thumb hovering over the glass. He exhaled, closed the app, and looked back at his index fund dashboard. The number was small, but it was growing. He chose to ignore the noise, turned off the screen, and went back to work. He was trading the satisfaction of today for a foundation he could not yet see. 3 years of relentless, silent consistency finally hit a threshold. Mark logged into his account on a Tuesday evening, expecting the usual marginal increase. Instead, he saw a change in the trajectory of the curve. The total balance was no longer just the sum of his $50 monthly transfers. The interest earned over the previous month was higher than the contribution he had just made. He stared at the numbers, checking them twice to ensure he was not misreading the decimals. The math had officially pivoted. For years, he had been the engine, forcing every dollar into the account through sheer willpower and sacrifice. Now, the momentum belonged to the system itself. His money was working harder than his labor ever could. He watched the graph. The line tilted upward, steeper than before, moving with a mechanical inevitability. He felt the weight of his previous anxieties dissolve. The struggle of the early months, the meticulous tracking of every penny, the rejection of every impulse purchase had been the price of admission for this moment. He was no longer just saving money. He was witnessing the mechanics of true wealth building in real time, a quiet, digital explosion of growth that required nothing more from him than the patience to let it continue. The implications of the numbers settled in. Mark looked at his current job, not as a tether, but as a resource. For years, he had arrived every morning driven by the fear of an empty bank account. He had stayed because he had no other option. Now, the landscape had shifted. He opened his work calendar, scrolling through the upcoming projects and meetings. He realized he could walk away at any moment. The panic that once dictated his professional choices was gone. He did not quit, but the quality of his presence changed. He began to speak up in meetings, offering ideas he had previously kept to himself to avoid conflict. He took on projects that interested him rather than just those that secured his position. He was no longer a gear grinding against the machine. He was an operator making calculated decisions. Every hour he spent at his desk was now a choice, a strategic move to build his capital further while maintaining his lifestyle. He was no longer trading his dignity for a paycheck. He was leveraging his time to expand his options. The office walls felt different, less like a cage and more like a training ground. He had achieved the ultimate leverage, the power to say no. Mark pulled the chair out from the kitchen table. It was 2 a.m., the same hour that had once marked the beginning of his nightly panic. He opened the laptop. The familiar glow illuminated the table, but the stack of overdue bills was long gone, replaced by a clean, wooden surface. He navigated to his banking app. The numbers on the screen were steady, reflecting a sum that surpassed his wildest expectations from 3 years ago. He did not rush to click away. He studied the balance, letting the reality of his discipline settle in. The math was final. The debt was a ghost of a past life. He closed the laptop with a single, firm motion. The room plunged into shadows. He stood up, walked to the wall switch, and pressed it. The harsh light vanished. Silence filled the apartment, thick and heavy, no longer interrupted by the frantic calculations of a desperate man. He walked to the bedroom and lay down. His breathing slowed, matching the rhythm of the quiet house. There were no flashing notifications, no pending deadlines, no looming threats. He closed his eyes. For the first time in years, the tension left his muscles completely. He sank into the mattress, falling into a deep, uninterrupted sleep.